Hi there, this is the second episode of Drizzle ORM. In this section, we're going to talk about the data types in SQL, in particular Postgres. As I mentioned in the previous section, if you're going to use Drizzle ORM, you should have some basic understanding of SQL. Especially when you want to define a table in Drizzle, you must determine the type of each field of the table from SQL types. For example, if you want to define a text field in your table, you can set its type to either text, Varchar, or Char. So you should know what's the difference between these types and which one fits your needs in the best way. Okay, in this section, I'm going to give you a basic understanding of SQL data types and how we can use them in Drizzle ORM. And before starting this section, I want to mention that knowing these data types is very important if you want to use Drizzle ORM. So having a good understanding of these data types makes the difference between a junior developer and senior one. So don't underestimate this section. Okay, these are the main type categories in PostgreSQL. We have numerics, Boolean, text, Json, datetimes, Enum, and binary. So let's talk about each type category in detail. Numeric types are divided into integer category and decimal category. So now let's talk about the integer types. The first integer type is the integer itself. It is a signed 4 bytes number. And 4 bytes means that each integer number takes 32 bits. One of these 32 bits is set aside for the sign, which determine the sign of the number. That can be negative or positive. So there will be 31 bits left. So each integer number ranges from the minus 2 to the power of 31 to 2 to the power of 31. Actually, it ranges from this number to this number. So if your number roughly ranges from the minus 2 billion to 2 billion, you can use the integer data type. And now let's go to our VS Code and our Node.js project, and let's see how we can use the integer data type in our table. So let's create another table for this purpose. I'm going to create a test table here. So I'm going to say export const test table and set it to pgTable function, set its name to test table, okay, and pass the object which will determine our fields and their data types in our table. So let's say we have a numeric type qdivide in our table. So I'm going to use the integer as the type of this qdivide field in our table. And this integer will be imported from the Drizzle ORM /pgcore. And then I'm going to put the name of the field inside the integer function. So I'm going to call it qdivide. And that's it. In this way, we can set the type of the qdivide field to integer. The next data type is small int. It is a signed 2 bytes, and 2 bytes mean 8 bits. So 1 bit is set aside for the sign. We have 7 bits left, and it ranges from the minus 2 to the power of 7 to 2 to the power of 7. And roughly it ranges from the minus 32,000 to 32,000. So if your number ranges from these two numbers, you can set the type of your field to the small int. So let's go to VS Code and see how we can use a small int. We just need to import the small int function from the Drizzle ORM /pgcore. You can see the small int here, and just set the name of the field inside the small int. That's it. The other data type that we can use is big int. So if you have a huge number, you can set the type of your field to big int. It is a signed 8 bytes number. And by 8 bytes, it means that each number occupies 64 bits. So as previous ones, 1 bit is set aside for the sign, and we have 63 bits left. So it ranges from the minus 2 to the power of 63 to 2 to the power of 63. So your number will be ranges from this number to this number. So as you can see, it's a huge number and I can't even read that. Okay, so now let's go to VS Code and see how we can use this big int type. And here we need to use the big int function that comes from Drizzle ORM /pgcore, and then we need to pass an object which has the mode inside it. So if your number is above the 2 to the power of 31 and is below 2 to the power of 53, you can set the mode to number. So it will be a JavaScript number type. But if your number is above the 2 to the power of 53, you can set the mode to big int. And now you can store a huge number in the qdivide field inside your table. Okay, the next category of our integer number is serial's number. The serial is actually an integer type number that is auto increment. So for example, when you want to insert a new entity in your database, the field which has the serial type will be initialized automatically by the database management system. For example, if the previous record has 50, the new one automatically will be set to 51, and so on. This serial types is ideal for the ID fields. We have three serial types: a serial or serial 4, which actually is a integer type, a small serial or serial 2, which has a small int type, and a big serial or serial 8, which has a big int type. So you can choose between these three serial type based on your needs. So now let's go to VS Code and see how we can use the serial types in our table. For example, let's say we have an ID field, which is the primary key of our table. So we can set it to serial and then set the name of this field inside the table. So I'm going to go ahead with the ID itself. Okay, so now it will be a auto increment integer. We can set it to small serial and it will be a small int auto increment ID, and also we can set it to big int just like the previous one. And now this ID field can continue to a really huge number. So if your table has a huge number of records, you should set your ID field to big serial. And in order to set it as a primary key, as you saw in the previous section, you can change the primary key function to your serial key. And here you can see that big serial gives us an error, and that's because just like the big int, you should set the mode of the big serial as well. So here I can choose the mode of this big serial from the big int or number. So I'm going to go ahead with the big int, and that's it. Another category of the numerical types in SQL are decimals. So decimal number can have a floating point. So the first one is the decimal itself. The precision of this data type can be set by the developer manually. It can store a very large number of digits inside it, and it can store 131,072 digits before the decimal point and up to 16,383 digits after the decimal point. So you can store a huge decimal number inside the decimal type. So now let's go to VS Code and see how we can use the decimal data types in our table. For example, here, let's say we have a price field. So I'm going to say price, and then we can set the type of this field to decimal, which again, as you can see, comes from Drizzle ORM PG Core. And then inside this decimal function, as before, pass the name of the field, which will be the price. Okay. And then here we must pass an object, and inside it we can specify two properties: precision and scale. So precision specify the total number of digits that this data type can store. For example, for the price, let's say we want to store a number which has at most 7 digits, and then we can specify the scale of the number, which determines that the number of fractional point of the number. So for example, let's say we want this price field to store 2 fractional points. So here our total number can be something like this. We can have a 7-digit number, for example 1 2 3 4 5 6 7, and then 2 of these 7 number can be set as the fractional part of our number. So again, the precision determines the total number of digits of the number, and scale determines the number of digits of fractional part of the number. And as a last tip, we can have a numeric data type which will be the same as the decimal. So the numeric and decimal data types are the same in Postgres. You can use them interchangeably. The next data type is real or float form. It is a single precision floating number with 4 bytes. It ranges from 10 to the power minus 37 to 10 to the power 37 with at least 6 decimal digit precision. In order to define a real data column, you can use the real function. So for example, let's say we have a score field and we just set its type to the real, which comes from the Drizzle ORM PG Core. And then we just need to pass the name of the field inside our table. So I'm going to go ahead with this score, and that's it. The next data type is double precision or float 8. It is a 8 bytes real number that ranges from the 10 to the power minus 307 to 10 to the power 308 with at least 15 decimal digits precision. And in order to use it, we just need to set the type of our field to double precision, which again comes from the Drizzle ORM / pgcore, and that's it. Well, the next data type is a different data type. It is a Boolean type which only takes 0 or 1 or true or false. And here, in order to use it, let's say we have a delivered field and we can set its type to the Boolean function and then just specify the name of the field inside the table. And just go ahead with the delivered itself, and that's it. The next categories of the data types inside the Postgres is the text data types. So the first one in this category is the text. It's a variable length of the string characters. The length of this data type is unlimited. You can store a very long text inside this data type. And in order to use that, let's say we have a description field. In order to set its type to text, we just need to set it to text function and just pass the name of the field inside the table. I'm going to go ahead with the description itself, and that's it. The next text data type is Varchar. It's a variable length of string characters that can store up to n characters. Let's say we want to set the type of the description to Varchar. So let's copy that and comment the first one. Okay, we can set it to Varchar function, and then we should specify the length of characters that this field can store. So here we can set the length inside the object and set it to, for example, 256. So this description field can save a string text up to 256 characters. So remember here that it can store text values up to at most 256, which means that it can store a text string with less than 256 characters. The next data type is char. It's a fixed length that can store strings up to n characters, but if you pass a string with less than n character, it will be padded with blank character in order to have exactly n character. And in order to use this, let's say we have a name field and set its type to char function and then pass the name of the field, which is name, and we can specify a length property for it. Let's set it to 10. So it will store strings up to 10 character. And for example, let's say we want to store a name of a product, for example, a chair. Okay, so it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 character inside it. And this will be saved inside the name field with 5 blank space. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So as you can see, 5 blank space will be added to our 5 character in order to have always 10 characters length. This is the difference between the char and varchar. The next data type is JSON. We can store a textual JSON data inside JSON data type. For example, here, let's say we have a data field and we can set its data type to JSON. And remember here that JSON must be imported from the Drizzle ORM / pgcore. And let's pass the name of the field inside the table. I'm going to go ahead with the data. And inside this data field, we can store a string or textual JSON object. We can have the Jsonb, which is a binary JSON data. So when we set the data types to the Jsonb, it will save our JSON object as a binary object inside this field. So inserting the data will be a little smaller than the JSON type because it must be converted to the binary form of the object and then stored to the data field. But subsequent processing of this Jsonb will be faster than the JSON type. So again, with JSON and Jsonb, you can store a JavaScript object inside this type of field. With JSON, it will be saved as a JSON string, but with Jsonb, it will be converted to the binary form of the object. So next we have the datetime data types. The first one is the time, that you can save time of a day inside it. You can't save the date inside the time, just time. Okay, so let's say we have a start at data field, which is, for example, starting time of an event. So we can set it to the time function, which comes from the Drizzle ORM, and set the name of the field. Just go ahead with the started at, and here we can pass the option object, and inside it we can specify the precision, and we can pass the with time zone, which can be set to true or false. Okay, so now let's set a default value for this field, and I'm going to change the default now function, which will set the time of the insertion as the default value for this field. Okay, so let's save this and open up our terminal and run a new migration. In the previous video, we have created a script for creating the migrations file and then pushing those migrations to our Postgres database. So I'm going to run that. I'm going to say npm run migrate. Okay, it will create the test table for us, and let's go to the adminer. Now, if I refresh the page, you can see that the test table has been created along with the users table. So if I click on that, and here I'm going to click on the new item and click on the save without any data, because the ID is set to auto increment and the started at field is set to the now function, which is a Postgres function. Click on the save. You can see it creates a default value for the started at field with a time zone. So this two number after the plus sign determines the time zone. So if I go back to our VS Code, and here let's set the with time zone to false. Okay, run the migration again. Let's go back to our adminer and click on the new item again. Click on the save to create new item, and you can see that this time the field doesn't have any time zone. So yeah, with this time zone option, you can determine whether your time has time zone or not. Also, we can change the precision, for example, to 3. Let's save this. Run the migration, okay, and then click on the new item, click on the save. You can see the precision is now reduced to 3. So the precision means the fractional point for a second. So you can see that the time is now 1434 minutes and 32 seconds and 677 milliseconds. Okay, so now if I set the precision to 0 and run a migration, let's refresh, you can see it still saved the time for us, but it doesn't save any fractional point for the second for us. So the precision means that the number of the fractional point after the second. For example, if we set it to 3, it will also save the number of milliseconds for us. Okay, that's it for the time data type. The next data type is timestamp. So it is the time plus the date. So if I go back to VS Code, and here let's add a date field and set its data type to timestamp. Okay, it will comes from the Drizzle ORM / pgcore. And then set the name of the field, which is date, okay, and pass the object function. We can set the precision with time zone and also mode. The precision and with time zone is just the same with the time data type, but with mode, you can specify that how to store your date time value. You can set it to string or date. If you set it to string, it will save the date time as a string inside your data field. But if you set it to date, it will save it as a date. So let's set it to date, and let's set the default value to the default now. Okay, let's run the migration and go to the adminer and click on the new item. You can see now we have a date here. Click on the save. You can see that the date is set to the current date time. Okay, so that's it for the timestamp, which saves the date plus the time for us. The next data type is date. It just saved the date for us. So if I go back to our VS Code and set the timestamp to just date, okay, let's import it and run a migration. Okay, so let's go back to the adminer and refresh. You can see it just saved the date for us without time. And the last data type in datetime category is interval. So if I go here, we can set it to interval. Okay, but here we can't set a mode, and also we can't set the default now as the default value for this interval. So what is the interval? Interval actually is a interval of time which will be saved as the number of milliseconds between two specific date times. It is possible to send long intervals like years as well to this interval data type. Okay, that's it for the datetime data type category. Okay, the next data type is enum. So with enum, you can create a enum data type just like enums in TypeScript, and then in your table create a data field and set its data type to that enum. So let's do it in action. So here before the table, let's create an enum. So I'm going to say export const. For example, let's go ahead with the Drizzle ORM example. Let's set its name to mood enum and set it to pg enum function. Okay, and then we should set a name for that. I'm going to go ahead with the mood, and then we should pass a list here which specify the values that this enum can take. So I'm going to say sad, just like the example in the Drizzle ORM documentation. Okay, and the last value that it can take is happy. Okay, and then inside our table definition, we can have a field. For example, we're going to create a field called mood, and we can now set its type to the mood enum that we just have created. And then we just need to pass the name of the field inside our table. Okay, so in this way we can create a data field and set its type to the custom enum that we have just created. Okay, that's it for the data types of Postgres database inside the Drizzle ORM. So the last thing I want to mention here is that with each of these data type, you can chain a function just like this that we have done here, default now. We can set a default value for each of these data fields. So for example, let's chain the default function here, and then we can specify a value as a default value for this field. Since it's a enum, we can choose between the values of that enum. Okay, so let's set it to okay. And also we can chain another function, not null function, which set the field to not null constraint. So with that, a field cannot be set to null value. By default, all your fields can have null value. And the other chainable function that you can use is the primary key. So with that, you can set a field as a primary key of your table. Also, we can have other chainable function like reference and RI that I'm going to talk about them in the upcoming sections. So yeah, I think that's it for this section. We have talked about the available data types of Postgres database inside the Drizzle ORM. I think 90% of these data types are the same between the other SQL databases like MySQL and SQLite. Okay, in the next episode, we're going to talk about the relationships between the tables inside the SQL databases. We're going to talk about the one-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many relationships and how we can implement them with the Drizzle ORM. So in order to get informed about the next video, please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell button. Stay tuned for my next video. Have a nice time. Bye-bye.